And you can go ahead and start your presentation.
All right, thank you, Sheila. Am I sharing my screen? Is that what you said?
Yes, you can share from your screen.
Okay, I'll do that. Let me share now. And hopefully that will work. Try that. Ryan, I can see you on my screen. Give me a thumbs up if it's okay. Good deal. Thank you very much. Well, hi, everybody. And appreciate the chance to share a couple of updates from February's meeting. In some ways, February feels like it was just yesterday, but in many ways, it feels like it's a long time ago. Some of you have tried to block February's meeting out of your mind because it was Super Bowl Sunday and you're outspoken Kansas City Chiefs fans, so you've tried to forget about that. But sorry, new reality. The Eagles are champs for this year, so we'll go forward from there. Two updates. This is not going to take long, but I want to give you a little bit of information, and then we will open it up to questions. But we'll have a chance to ask questions again later, as you will see too. Okay, so the first one is on that collaboration challenge. First update we want to give is on the collaboration challenge. If you remember, you were in that space for the collaboration challenge work we did, that session in February. We kind of rebranded it on the spot as a collaboration opportunity. Pictured on your screen there are the institutions that participated in the collaboration opportunity. And so I want to talk more about what that opportunity was and what that opportunity is going forward. So a couple things that you see here. This is what you were charged with doing in real time. And that was, we paired you up with somebody from outside your institution, outside your faculty circle, somebody you had not talked to, at least formally before. And we said, just start talking about your teaching interests, your research interests, what overlap you find, where you find some similar questions or similar challenges. We encouraged you to expand from there to what your students need, what your students are seeing or crying out for, what the state needs or what your service region needs, problems that you see need to be addressed, questions you need to that you think need to be answered. We encourage you you had 15 minutes to solve all the world's problems, basically. So that was that opportunity that you had on that day. So then we asked you in the post-session work, and I know some of you embrace this part more than others, and so we're putting it back on the table for you to follow up on at least one of those collaboration conversations. We asked you to talk about those collaboration conversations, both from the February meeting and then anything that happened after that in your faculty circles. And then we asked you to connect with at least one colleague to pursue a collaboration initiative. We don't know what that initiative is going to be. It's completely up to you. We don't know what the outcome will be, but we know if you don't pursue those conversations, then nothing's going to happen. So we really did keep it that wide open, and we think it's important for you to, to use your experience, to use your interests, and to use the conversations that you started and just see where you want to go with them. So we want you to do that, okay? The one reason we want you to do that is because this is my Oprah moment. We have funding available to support those initiatives that you might be envisioning in your mind. So think back now that you know that CPE can help support some of this. What is it that you and your collaborator talked about? What is it you and your collaborator might want to do? This could be something short term. I will say the funding is modest, but it is not nothing. And so it is a chance to use a mini grant and give us an idea. Tell us what you're interested in doing. It's funding that could cover some travel, could cover some materials, could cover a range of things that could make collaboration possible. And so we want to put that in front of you. We're going to put it in front of you now as an announcement, and then we're going to put it in front of you by April 1st. You will have the access to the short application. So that application for the mini grant funding will be available April 1st. It'll be due April 15th. And then you will have an idea that you might be able to pursue in summer or in fall. Okay, so now if you want to start it before summer, you can likely do that. But I know you'll be busy with other things from April 15th through the end of the semester. But you will have funding that you could use for a collaboration exercise in the summer or the fall. Okay, So we'll have to shut it off by December, by December of 25, in part because we'll then make the opportunity available, fingers crossed, funding available to next year's Faculty Leadership Academy. Okay, so that is one. You may have questions and you can ask them in just a minute, but that's one of the updates. The other update I want to give you is on where are the faculty leaders. That was another session that I did. Rusty Carpenter and I led that session in February. You read that article, Where Are the Faculty Leaders, in advance of February's meeting. And then we worked with that article, among other things, or kind of in a broader context during February's meeting. So what I want to tell you is that the Journal of Faculty Development, and as you know, the Faculty Leadership Academy is a faculty development exercise, but the Journal of Faculty Development turns 40 in 2026. Okay, that journal wants to include an update to the 2007 Where Are the Faculty Leaders article in its 2026 issue, and wants some, all, any of you all to write that update. And so what I mean by that is that in May, Rusty and I will stand back in front of you and we will make a call for contributors to an article in the Journal for Faculty Development. So what that means is your participation in the Faculty Leadership Academy could include outcomes of a publication and grant-funded collaboration opportunity. So I'm just putting that there so that you might start to revisit those notes. Mentors have been alerted that this is coming, so that may be part of faculty circle conversations. It is not a faculty circle assignment. It is not something a faculty circle is going to write. It may be something that 3 of you decide you want to write for the Journal of Faculty Development. It may be something that 20 of you decide you want to do. That is completely up to you, but it is contributing to a single article. And so that's part of what we'll be talking about. Some of you may hear that and say, well, I want to write my own article as well. That opportunity is certainly there. Journal for Faculty Development is always taking, submissions. So you can certainly look at that call for submissions beyond what we are doing as a Faculty Leadership Academy. But I'm telling you, we have a commitment that this article that you all write will be published. That's the easiest way to say it. It will be published. So with that, I will take any questions, anything you're wondering kind of at first blush here. And Sheila, if they don't have any questions, that's fine. You can email me. You see my name on there. It's gil.hunter@eku.edu. You can follow up with questions. Don't follow up and ask, where's the application for the mini grant funding? That will be April 1st. That will come to you on April 1st, okay, or by April 1st. And probably come from Sheila, because she's the one with the money, not me.
Thank you very much, Gil. Well, we'll go ahead and start moving into our budget-related topics today. Before you on the screen, you see Mary Pfister Tucker from the Morehead State and Adam Blevins from the CPE. Adam will start us off today. So Adam, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Sheila. All right. Let's see. Can everyone hear me right now? All right.
Yes.
The mic is working. So while the slides are getting pulled up, as Sheila said, my name is Adam Blevins. I'm the Associate Director of our Finance Policy and Programs Unit here at the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. Somewhat new to the role, but I've been here at the Council for about a year and a half in total. I'm appreciative for the time to speak with you all today. And really what my goal is to give you a very broad overview of kind of the ways that the Council impacts particularly operating budgets at our post-secondary institutions across the state. So that being said, this is going to be, you hear a mile wide and about an inch deep. This is probably more like a half-mile wide and still an inch deep. Just a cross-section of a couple of our major functions here, particularly with the unit that I work in. But here's a quick overview of the agenda today. I'll just be talking a little bit about what CPE is, what my unit does with finance policy programs, I'll give a quick snapshot of just general campus operating revenues and expenditures for the system. So for public institutions in Kentucky. And then I'll go into a couple of our probably more important and vital substantive programs through which we interact with our campuses. All right, so the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education, we're the statewide coordinating board for all of our post-secondary education institutions, so we work for the system. We also do some licensure and such for our private institutions as well. But our big goal really is to collaborate with our institutions, policymakers, other stakeholders to improve post-secondary education. We do quite a bit in the way of, policy evaluation, particularly in the middle of legislative session as we currently are. We also have quite a few compliance functions, a couple of which, it's more statutory requirements are the items I'll be discussing today. But to jump down into the finance policy and programs unit, we do a lot of different things, including policy research and evaluation. But what I'll be discussing today, again, is kind of the biennial budget development, as well as some appropriation stuff, tuition and fee setting. And I won't speak to it directly, but I'll also touch on some things that we do with programming and creation with appropriated funds. So we'll just jump in. First off, I want to give you all kind of a very quick snapshot of campus operating budgets, really just looking at where revenue is coming from and what money is being spent on. So all the data that I'm showing in this section is from iPads. It's very accessible. It's open to the public. So feel free to go in there, play around with the variables and the analyses that you can conduct in there if you like. But here, what I'm showing you now is pretty much a breakdown of major sources of revenue for our post-secondary system in Kentucky. So this is for 22-23, and we're talking about net tuition and fees. So that's total tuition and fees minus any allowances and discounts. We'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly, but that's essentially just things like grants, money that goes back to students and such. State and local appropriations, so money given by the state, gifts, endowments, and investment returns. That's largely related to kind of private donor gifts and such. State and local grants, contracts, federal grants and contracts are another piece of this, and then auxiliary enterprises, which is probably the most ambiguous item on this list, I would say, but it's really just goods and services sold to students, faculty, and staff. Think of things like residence halls, room and board, dining plans, things like that. So the reason I'm talking with you all today primarily about the biennial budget development and the tuition and fee setting process is because you can see there on the chart, it's about half of the total revenue for our post-secondary system in the state. So those are really the big items that are of interest, particularly with our functionality and with how we collaborate and work with our institutions. So drilling this down a little bit, I've disaggregated that chart here to show what it looks like by sector. So you can see the differences in revenue sources across research institutions here on the far left, comprehensive institutions in the middle, and then our 2U institutions of KCTCS over on the far right. And you can pretty much see, as you'll see on the spending side as well, some of the missional differences of these institutions. So, for example, our research institutions, they get quite a bit of funds from, gifts, endowment, investment returns, grants and contracts for research, but still quite a bit of money coming in from state local appropriations as well as net tuition fees. When you look over to the right, both comprehensive institutions and KCTCS, that revenue is primarily coming from those appropriations and tuition fees. So far more reliant on those, and that aligns very much with those missions of more student focused, student support efforts, regional recruitment, things of that nature. So that's a quick snapshot of the revenue side. Here's a quick snapshot of the expenditure side. And we're talking about a lot of different things. So instruction, research, public service, which is essentially things that are external to the institution, that institutions still provide for public benefit. You can think of things like EKU has like Model Lab, for example. 4-H is another example, things of that nature. Student services, institutional support, which is really more of the administrative piece for institutional support, philanthropy, fundraising, all that good stuff. Maintenance of operation, which isn't shown in the chart to the right, it's baked into the numbers that are presented there. And again, scholarships, fellowships, that's really substantial. And again, that auxiliary enterprises item as well. And you can see here, a lot of the spending is of course going to instructions. These are post-secondary institutions that's intended to educate our students. And then quite a bit is also going out to public services as well. And you can also see quite a bit of expenditure and research there in orange. And again, you can see how this is highlighting some of those missional differences between our institution types, with research institutions spending quite a bit on research, public service, instruction, and it's very instruction and student support heavy for comprehensives as well as KCTCS. Like I said, we're flying through this very high level stuff. So we're going to go ahead and walk over to the biennial budget development piece of this that I'll kind of briefly describe and then show you kind of an example of what appropriations look like at the end of this section. So biennial budget development, the way that we facilitate this is really working with our institutions to get their budget priorities, the big items that they need or that would really support their operations or their capital investment, things like that. So it's a bit of a process of us doing some research collaboration here at the council with our other stakeholders and of course with our institutions, working to develop this. This happens every other year. So next year's session, this will be a final budget, essentially will be the end product of it. And before that, we have to submit this recommendation to the Governor and General Assembly for their consideration as they craft the final budget. When we talk about the big pieces of this request, really we're talking about 4 items that you see on the screen right now. That includes operating funds. So if you think back to that revenue side, this would be state appropriations for our post-secondary institutions. Trust funds, which this is a great opportunity to talk about one of those programs that CP administers, Bucks for Brains. That's really a program, an endowment match program that provides state appropriations for efforts targeting primarily research in STEM age in its current model. So you can think of things like fellowships, scholarships, professorships, things like that. You know, it's meant to go into an endowment with that interest, essentially paying for those activities over time. Capital investments, another great opportunity to talk about one of our programs, or one of the things that we administer here at CPE, the asset preservation pool. So that's again appropriated money that is used to repair or replace facilities and infrastructure that have outlived their useful life. So they're just old stuff that needs to be replaced, repaired, and in extreme cases, torn down or raised and replaced. The last item there is really for CPE's operating budget, which is outside of the scope of our conversation today, but it does impact our ability to do a lot of the work that we do with our institutions, you know, with our various stakeholders in supporting post-secondary education, and of course that workforce line as well. All right. So again, this is pretty much an example coming out of the budget bill for the current fiscal year, actually, so 24-25, just showing kind of the breakdown of what has been appropriated for this year. So this includes things like performance funding. I would love to go into a ton of detail on this, but I could probably spend a couple hours talking about it and still not get fully through it. But it is essentially a distribution model based on outcome metrics that allocates a pot of money to our institution. So that's about $105 million in the current fiscal year. The other things, mandated programs that can include research. That's a lot of those public service activities I discussed earlier. Those are restricted funds, meaning they are specified for specific use. They're not really for general operation. Similarly, debt service is also what you consider to be a restricted fund, meant to pay off debt service for state bonds related to capital projects. And then the adjusted net general fund there, that's essentially taking the appropriation and subtracting out mandated programs and debt service, which leaves you with the money that you can actually spend educating students, and more so your general pot of money coming out of the appropriation. Now, I will say there's an appendix in this presentation, so whenever Sheila sends it to you, you can scroll it to the back of it and you will find, you will be able to find pretty much a disaggregation of this by institution if you're interested in seeing what the appropriation for your specific institution is. So the other major thing I want to talk about today is, of course, the tuition setting process here. So this is essentially a process. It can happen every year. Over the last couple of cycles, it has been set on a 2-year basis that has happened to align with our biennial budget development. But essentially, this is a mechanism by which, we try to control the amount by which tuition fees can increase in a given year. Now, the thought process behind this is really to promote accessibility and affordability for our students across the Commonwealth. This is something that applies to resident undergraduate tuition fee, that should also specify. But it's really a way for us to ensure that we're serving our students in that capacity. But we also have to balance that with institutional resource needs, which is much easier said than done. So as you can see on this chart here, prior to the implementation of these caps, there were substantial year-to-year increases in tuition fee rates. There are good reasons for that, such as inflation. But again, these caps are in place to try to balance that need for affordability for our students and resource needs for our institutions. In developing that, what my unit does is essentially a huge environmental scan. We get a lot of feedback from our institutions and their representatives. We look at a ton of stuff and consider some really important issues like the amount of state appropriation, those trends over time, enrollment trends, inflation, things that can really impact that big category, for example, tuition fee revenue. And again, we include it's kind of a broad-based environmental scan. This list is not at all exhaustive, but it includes looking at net price, doing interstate comparisons across these things, historical state funding, so on and so forth. To give you a little bit of a snapshot of what this looks like right now, the last cycle set a maximum increase of 5% over 2 years, no more than 3% in any 1 year for our public 4-year institutions. For KCTCS, that looks a little different, where it's charged on a per hour basis. So $7 over 2 years, no more than $4 in any 1 year for KCTCS. And again, this is something I pulled out of SHEOS, the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association. They have a fantastic tool called SHEF. But this is essentially showing that student share of total education revenues. So essentially the proportion of those education revenues comprised of tuition and fees. As you can see, the first orange block there for Kentucky, 2024, about half of those revenues were generated from tuition fees. And that is very important whenever you consider, again, how much of the post-secondary system in the state draws revenues out of that pool. And so just to give a little bit more context as well, the other important consideration when we're talking about tuition fees is that a tuition dollar isn't necessarily just a dollar. And that's because, like I mentioned before, discounting. So if you think of things like institutional grants, which I have here in orange, unrestricted institutional grants that are given back, only about 72 cents on the dollar of that tuition fee revenue is actually used for that operating and educating fund. And the rest is essentially discounted back to students from the stated price. I think I went through that pretty quickly, but I do just want to really quickly conclude this by saying, a lot of what we do at the council, particularly with regard to our interactions with institutions, the finance policy program unit, it's really about balancing that affordability, accessibility, student success, return on investment for students and the state with resource needs for the institutions. That takes a lot of communication across various stakeholders. It takes a lot of collaboration to kind of make that happen. And really, the two things that I was talking about today between the biannual budget development process and our tuition fee setting process as well. Those are essentially two big mechanisms that we use that have an impact on those operating budgets and that have really substantive impacts on campuses. That is all I have today. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Do we have any questions, or are there any questions for Adam before we move into Mary's presentation? All right, well then give us about 30 seconds while we flip PowerPoints around and we'll move to Mary.
The button right there on the microphone. Sorry. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Pfister Tucker. I'm the Vice President of Finance at Morehead State University, and I'm happy to be here today to talk to you a little bit about the institutional budgeting approach. And so today, my hopes are that when you walk away, you'll understand more of what the purpose of the university budget is. You'll have an understanding of the key phases of the university budget process. And typically what is included in a university's budget, along with the various sources and uses of funds, and we'll kind of build on what Adam has already talked about today. We'll talk briefly about the different types of common budget models that are used at universities. And then we'll move into more of how curriculum mapping is really important for universities, and discuss some of the processes that might go into proposals for new program evaluations. So why does a university need a budget? The university budget is really its financial blueprint of how it's going to translate the revenues that it has available into an actionable financial plan to achieve its strategic goals. So it really is the way that the university allocates its funds to the priority initiatives. And it ensures the financial stability of the university. So Morehead's the third campus I've been on, and I can say that and all of them were in Publix in the state of Kentucky. All of them every university approaches the budget process a little different. So while your campus may have different procedures, may use individual meetings or committees, all of them should have these components as part of their budget process. So in the very beginning, before any numbers are really discussed or anything, leadership will typically determine what the strategic priorities are for the university. And with those priorities being set, there'll begin to be some forecasting and models built on revenues and expenses. And so a lot of the things that will go into that is projected retention rates on students, enrollment management, projection of our new student populations, things like that. So the revenues will be projected, and then the expenses will be projected, looking at what are those unavoidable things that are going to increase, like service contracts, utility bills, things like that, to determine what is available to be allocated. And then the resources from there will be allocated based on those strategic priorities that were set. Lots of times there's many iterations of a budget as you're going through the process based on feedback and review of what departments have said are important, and what leadership feels falls into these strategic priorities that have been set. And then but finally, after many iterations, typically a final budget will be drafted, and at all of our institutions, our governing boards have to approve that final budget. So they go before our Board of Regents, Board of Trustees, and then they get implemented. And during the implementation process, revenues and expenditures are regularly reviewed and tracked, and there can be budget amendments at times when necessary. So campuses can use various types of budget models. At the campus that I'm at right now, we use incremental budgeting for basically all of our revenue streams and expenses. But some universities might use a zero-based budget approach, which would be where you have to justify all expenses from scratch. There are universities who use performance-based budgeting, which would be allocating the revenues based on various measurable outcomes. Now, I have to say, and if you had an opportunity to read the article that was suggested before the session, these are not an all or nothing approach. So the article talked about, I believe it's Oregon State, that they used performance-based for their online tuition revenue, but they use incremental budgeting for everything else. And that's not uncommon. I know in a previous life, there were departments at a larger university who did more of a zero-based budget approach, while other areas of the university used an incremental budgeting approach. So these do not have to be an all or nothing, but they are the typical approaches that are used more often than not. The last one, responsibility-centered management, RCM, you'll hear buzzword talked about quite a bit. And that's basically where the colleges operate as financial units or as kind of a freestanding business, if you will. And so revenue gets allocated typically in those models based on different mechanisms. Sometimes it's a combination of credit hours generated and number of degree programs or students in the degree programs. So it can be a very fluid based on the university and how they think it best represents how the university operates. But in those things, all the administrative, like my department, would be allocated out to each college and managed in that manner. But so when you start looking at a university, all of us are employed at university or colleges, community colleges that are governmental or public universities, which means that we utilize what's called governmental accounting standards or GASB for our financial statement preparation. And I think it's really important to note that, when you open up, if you all go, and I encourage you to go and pull up your last year's financial statement for your university, they should be available online on all the websites. If you pull up the actual audited financial statements, there's going to be a schedule in there. It's going to be called the Statement of Revenues, Expenses, and Changes in Net Position, which is basically your income statement. That statement is going to include everything in the university. So I tried to depict this out in a kind of a house format. So if you bear with me for just a minute, there could be agency funds buried in that statement, those are funds that really don't belong to the university, but that some employee of the university manages how those are distributed. And then there's also non-current funds, which are things like the facilities, the land, the depreciation expense on those equipment. There can be loan funds if the university, most of us have Perkins loan funds, things like that. And there can be endowment funds possibly. Some of us do not have freestanding foundations, some of us do. But, so it can vary, but, there's non-current funds, which what that term means is everything that's on the screen right now are funds that are not really expendable in the current operating cycle or the current fiscal year. You have current funds also included in that statement, and there's two big categories of current funds. There's restricted funds, which are where someone external to the university determines how the money can be spent. So that's more like the grants and contracts, maybe some type of specifically designated appropriation, things like that. So restricted funds are currently expendable. And then you also have unrestricted funds, which are the funding sources that the university gets to decide how to spend. So they're the things that, most of the things that Adam discussed, tuition and fees, state general appropriations, things like that. So I wanted to point this out because what your university budgets can differ depending on whether your university budgets all funds, or whether they budget only their unrestricted, or whether they budget a combination thereof. So as example, the university that I'm at, we budget unrestricted funds and we budget some restricted funds, but not all the restricted funds. So, you know, it can differ. I also think it's important when you look at your university's financial statement to understand these funds, because for Morehead State University, and I would venture to say most of your universities, if you pulled up last year's financial statement, you're likely going to see a large positive net position, change in net position for last year, or basically net income for last year. The reason for that is the plant funds, that big green column there. All of us received funds from the state of Kentucky last year to pay for asset preservation projects. The regionals received 100% of the funds. With this year, we're getting 100% without having to have any match on it at all. So those funds are income and flow directly to, we had no expenses on that schedule of statement of revenues, expenses, and change in that position, because those expenses were put into assets. And at the risk of this turning into an accounting class, they're not, the expenses aren't part of this statement, but the revenue was. And so, you know, going back to Morehead State University, if you pulled our financial statement, you'd see that we have about a $14 million profit last year. But in reality, that was all money from the plant funds. Our unrestricted and restricted funds basically broke even. So if one of our faculty members looked at the statement, they might think, well, the university made 14 million. Why aren't we getting raises? Well, the reality is the university did not make 14 million. The university received 14 million that went into capital projects, and we basically just broke even. So I wanted to take a moment to talk through that so that we can make sure that everybody has a full understanding of when you compare your financial statement to maybe the operating budget. It's important to note that not everything that's on that financial statement is likely to be part of your operating budget that's adopted. So on the operating budget, typically you will always find what's in the yellow. So you always find your student fees, your general state appropriation. There's revenue that's called indirect cost recoveries. which actually Angie Martin from UK and I were just having a conversation about indirect cost recoveries. That is the money that the university receives from various grants and contracts to cover the overhead costs, to cover my expenses, accounting departments to spend expenses, and so on and so forth, the buildings that the research are done in. And so there's a lot of activity going on in Washington, D.C. related to indirect cost recovery rates for universities right now. That really can be concerning depending on how large your restricted funds are to your total financial statement. There's also, you'll earn investment income off of your cash reserves. And then you'll have sales of goods and services that could be from sales to students, or it might be from what we call auxiliary enterprises, which are like our housing and things like that, things that are ran with the intention of making a profit. So the things that come to mind typically are bookstores, housing, food services, things like that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we talked quite a bit about on the previous slide, the current restricted and the non-current revenue sources. But just know that they may or may not be part of your university's overall budget. So if you're looking again at your financial statement, the financial statement under GASB requires that universities present their expenses in what's called a functional classification. And Adam talked a little bit about this in his presentation. But, it's important to note for the majority of us, instruction is going to be the lion's share of our expenses. Both when you look at all funds and when you look at just your unrestricted current funds. But I think it's important to note that if you look at it by the natural class, all of us, regardless of whether you have a large auxiliary enterprise like a hospital or not, all of us, our number one expense is going to be personnel, compensation, and benefits. So when you look at the combination of the personnel being, for Morehead State, personnel's over 55% of our total expenditures, with instruction being for Morehead about 31% of our overall expenditures, you see real quickly that the importance of curriculum mapping, program management and development and review. So, when you really start to look at curriculum mapping and the impact it can have on the financial statements, curriculum mapping at its heart naturally ensures that, that the learning outcomes are achieved by having a systematic alignment of the courses. But it can also provide information on when there's course redundancies or overlap, which can allow for some consolidation and more efficient use of faculty time, which can lead to a more efficient schedule build. So, in the perfect world, if I could have, Mary Pfister's dream university, it would be that every program had a curriculum map so that you could just literally almost push a button and determine exactly how many sections of English 101 we need to offer in any given fall or any given spring. when you're able to do that, you're able to ensure that faculty workloads are balanced. And you would be able to avoid underutilizing staff or hiring unnecessarily faculty. So, as an example of how that could work and why it can be so meaningful, let's just hypothetically say that accounting and finance are the only 2 degree programs at a university that require Tax 201 to be taken. And if you look here, Tax 201 is indicated to be taken in the 3rd year of an accounting major in the fall. But finance degrees, it's encouraged to be taken in year 2 of the spring semester. And again, this is all hypothetical. But in this scenario, if you only had the 2 degree programs, and let's say they don't have large enrollment at whatever university hypothetically we're talking about, then this may provide an opportunity to look at it for the dean to look at this and say, you know what? Why don't we adjust and have finance majors not take the tax class until the fall, so that the instructor that's teaching tax can teach 1 class each year that is at full capacity rather than teaching 2 sections at half capacity, thereby increasing the credit hour production of that instructor. On the other hand, we might have a situation where, hypothetically, let's say Econ 101 is required by 7 different degree programs. By having the curriculums mapped out, you're able to know exactly how many students you have coming up that are going to need Econ 101, so that you can make sure that you have faculty hired and ready to teach the courses. What that does is it not only reduces the number of low enrolled courses, and therefore enhancing the cost efficiency of the courses, but it also makes sure that students are progressing in their degree program, because it eliminates bottlenecks when a course may not be available. So curriculum mapping can really have an impact on student retention and graduation rates, which can increase the tuition revenue and increase revenue stability over time. If you're not losing students because they get frustrated because they needed Econ 101 and it's always full, or it's not offered till the spring and maybe they needed it in the fall or what have you. So curriculum mapping can really have an impact. But perhaps the most exciting thing that curriculum mapping can do is often it can help identify gaps in high demand disciplines. So, it can help develop new programs, which can increase enrollment and increase tuition for a university. So when you look at a new academic program, there's various components that go into it, but from a financial perspective, the key things that typically need to be addressed when you're doing a proposal is what is, at the end of the day, what the net tuition revenue is going to be generated for that new program. And in order to get a good projection of that net tuition revenue, you really have to determine what the student demand will be, what the labor trends are going to be related to that program, and what kind of competition you've got. So there's various ways to gather this information. For the student demand information, you could either do a student survey, or you could, look at Google Analytics to see how often a certain degree program is being Googled or being searched for. For the labor trends, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has all kinds of information on trends. You can look at job postings, again, going towards that, the website, various website analytics tools to see what kind of jobs are coming in your region. And then you can look at the competition and, you know, for instance, if you're looking at starting a EDD program, you may not want to do that if you've got 5 universities around you that have robust, growing, highly thought of EDD programs. So you really have to look at what your competition is. Competition plays a big part into the net tuition revenue because, as Adam talked about, all of us discount our tuition. All of us give institutional scholarships. And knowing your competition and what the student demand is, and what the capacity is already can lead you to determining how much you might have to discount your tuition or what tuition rate you could garner from the new program. You also, on the other side, have to figure out what those direct costs. Typically, you look at the direct cost or the new incremental cost of a new program when you're analyzing the program. Some universities will do it different. We'll analyze the total costs, but when you're looking at just the direct costs, you have to think through what are the accreditation requirements for the degree program. So, you know, are there going to be added cost for being accredited and staying accredited? There could be unique resource requirements, like you could have a special lab that you have to have, so you'll have to cost out all those kinds of things. Do you have the space to handle the research component if there is any you know, a new STEM major, things like that. The last thing on this slide is the staffing required. And this is something that is really sometimes difficult for people to get their minds around. I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with folks on campus about a potential new degree program, and they'll say, well, we already have, you know, econ professors. Why can't we have another econ degree? Well, you really have to look at what's the credit hour generation of those econ professors, and do they have the capacity to teach more classes? So, you know, we all have some kind of staffing model for our faculty, for our professors and our instructors. You know, it's either 4 course load or a 5 course load. And that's consistent around all universities. And so the question becomes, if you've done your curriculum mapping and you know how many courses, how many sections you have to have, and you know how many instructors you have, if it's using all 4 of your instructors' course capability, then you don't really have any staff to be able to do it. Or you may be able to have the instructor teach the new program and hire an adjunct to teach an entry-level class. So you really have to dig deep into the courses that are going to be required under the academic program, whether they're new courses or existing courses. If they're existing courses, do you have the capacity in the course schedule now? Or if they're new classes, do you have the faculty that have release time now that could maybe give up the release time to teach the new courses? Or you really have to look at all of that before you can determine truly what the direct cost of a new program is. So I feel like I went really fast there. But I'll open it up to questions now.
Does anybody have any questions for Mary? While you may be thinking, of questions, one thing I think it's, important to note is at the state level, when your institutions are proposing new programs, they have to request approval from the CBE. And so as part of the program approval process, we ask institutions to provide us information about student and market demand in their region, as well as for the whole state. And we also ask institutions to describe what the cost of the program is. And one thing that we do regularly hear is, well, we already offer similar content, so there's not going to be a cost to it. So, so I think it's important to note that, you know, the things that we've been talking about in the academy this year, they all kind of weave together. The curriculum mapping sounds like, you know, in some ways just a purely academic review of the curriculum, but, you know, in conjunction with other aspects of the institution, you know, you're starting to see some collaboration, not just with people, but with how the different things that we've been talking about this year, how they interact with each other. If there aren't any questions, give us a couple minutes to shift chairs around. Oh, yes, Matthew, go ahead.
Going back several slides
Oh,
to
we can't hear
the
you, or at least I can't.
testing, can people hear me?
Yes.
Great. Going back several slides to the different types of budgeting, the performance budgeting one, I'm working on another project about higher education, looking at using balanced scorecards as a form of performance budgeting. Are you aware of other schools using those types of methods, or is that kind of not used as much in higher education?
I am not aware of any university in the state that any of the public universities represented by this group using that. But if there are universities that do use performance funding for, I don't know of any, actually, I don't know that I've seen any that use it for everything, but I have seen it for universities to allocate some portions of their revenue. So there may be universities, for instance, that give back a portion of the tuition and fees based on the average credit hour generation of their faculty in each unit, something like that.
Any other questions? Yes.
This is Jill Campbell from Eastern. I was just wondering if when we were talking about sort of the different types of budgeting models, I was wondering if you know how many schools kind of follow which ones here in the state. And when I went to talk to our CFO person, you know, I was learning more about what we're doing because Eastern is kind of in the middle of shifting our budgeting model. And so I just wondered if one, you knew kind of how it broke down in the state of who was using what, and then also if there was one that maybe you all have seen more or less success with.
I can tell you that the one that I see the most is incremental budgeting. I actually was on your campus as the controller years ago, and I know that at that point they used incremental budgeting at EKU.
Yeah.
There are components at UK that use zero-based budgeting. But there's also areas of UK that do the incremental budgeting. Morehead State is 100% incremental budgeting. So I think it really depends on the university, but there was a time when I think everybody was looking at moving to an RCM model. I don't hear that as much anymore, and I'm kind of looking to Angie Martin to see if she would agree with that or not. You know, I think come join us, but so you know, I'm not aware of any university in the state that's using RCM. Are you, Angie?
Yes.
At this point?
At this point, I believe hello, everybody. I'm Angie Martin. I'm the Chief Budget Officer at the University of Kentucky. At this point, I believe U of L is actually more on a RCM type model. And I believe Northern, is looking, there's Ronaldo, he can jump in. Northern is more on, at least looking at RCM. It varies over time as to the president and the leadership as to how they want to guide that institution and what incentives they want to put in. UK is, I would say, is a mix. We do a lot of incremental on what we call undesignated general funds, those typical tuition state appropriation funds. I'd say we are actually more on an RCM for our auxiliaries and UK healthcare. They definitely have to watch their revenues, their expenses, and they are assessed all cost to fund that. But then for the colleges, which we have an incentive-based model that actually comprises of 3 different performance funding models that the university uses to incentivize growth and the values of the institution. The
I
budget
think that-
models.
I'm sorry. Well, I guess the reason I was also sort of asking that is because as you're looking at, as someone who's kind of new to this topic, as I'm looking at the different areas across the campus, both academically and non-academic areas, certain things just seem to, I don't know if every area is always going to be able to be in the black, I know that your sciences are there's different levels of grant funding, at least there have been, I know everything's in a kind of a weird spot right now with the NIH and just a lot of grants and stuff, but I work in the arts and humanities, and I feel like that certain fields are sort of typically going to function, it'd be great if everything could function, at like it could pay for itself, but the things that you get from things like the arts on your campus, I feel like certain budget types really don't help you stay holistic or stay like sort of to this liberal arts curriculum that we really ascribe to in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of the pieces in that kind of curriculum really support the campus, the graduate profile that we've been working on so hard. And so I feel like I don't know if I know fair is a carnival that comes to town once a year, but what I'm really trying to think about is, how is it that we make sure that our campuses are going to have lots of thriving areas and not just become very, you're only going to be funded if you're 100% bringing in this much revenue, because I just don't know that that works all the time. And that's really part of my question also.
Well, I can address part of that. The University of Kentucky looked at RCM very seriously about 10 to 12 years ago. And with a pure RCM, you allocate the revenues to revenue generating units, and then you have to allocate the central costs, if you will, to all those revenue generating units. We got into the discussion where you are exactly highlighting, where we had some colleges that just would not thrive under such a model. And after looking at it for an extended period of time, we decided it was better not to implement an RCM for the colleges and to instead use incremental budgeting, but then have these financial allocation models, these incentive models to complement incremental funding.
Thank you so much. That actually makes a lot of sense and was kind of what I was trying to figure out. Like, I know that this is very complicated and that we're talking about an immense amount of money in this whole kind of system. And that the way I look at it is every single dollar that is being spent is coming from somewhere, it's coming from some family that is investing in education for their children. And, I manage budgets, but obviously not on this scale. And so, I always try to be so diligent with the way that I'm looking at that. But I also think that there's a human side to everything is not just a percentile. You know, human beings have to be seen and be taught well. And so I appreciate very much your thoughtful answer on that. Thank you again.
We've started our panel, so let me give, Todd Kill, if you don't mind to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Ronaldo, who's joining us from Western remotely.
Hi, everyone. My name is Todd Kilburn. I'm recently appointed as the Chief Financial Officer at the Kentucky Community and Technical College System. I've been here since July 1st, so thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Ronaldo, can you introduce yourself too?
Yes, Ronaldo Domini. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Budget, Finance, and Analytics at Western Kentucky. I've been in my role for nearly 4 years now, but I've been involved in the Commonwealth. I worked at U of L a couple of years ago, and as well in the private sector in healthcare in Louisville. Thank you for having me.
So we can probably start shifting to some of our questions for the panel. I do think it's important to point out that, you know, we've been talking about the expense of a program. And if an institution knows that a program will be producing revenue, then it has some ability to support the programs that may not be producing revenue. So that's one of the reasons it's important to know what the cost of your program is, because there may be a program that can in some ways carry another program. So some of you, we got some questions submitted in advance from your faculty mentors. But if you have questions as we go through this, please feel free to put them in the chat. Gil will be monitoring it for us, and so he'll break in and help me pay attention to those questions. So our first question pertains to the performance funding model. This is a question that one of you had, and why revenue percentages are different for KCTCS versus the comprehensives versus the flagships. For example, many of the colleges at KCTCS get about 40% of their funding from the state, but NKU gets less than 25% of its revenue from the state. So Todd, do you have information about this that you can share?
So this is my first round through the budget process here, so I'm trying to understand that as well from our perspective, as to exactly how this funding model was developed and how it works. It's very often for us, kind of the secondary question after the research and comprehensive universities are looked at. But as to how that percentage was developed, I don't know the answer to that question. But it's a question I have, and I will try to find out a better answer for you and get back to you. I don't have the experience of having been here to be able to work through that with you.
Do any of the other panelists have something they'd like to share?
I will say, I can definitely source that for you. This is also something that I'm getting acquainted with as I onboard with the funding model in particular. You know, there are some differences in terms of how it's administered, I will say, you know, for our 4 years, we generally, CPE will administer those funds based on our output metrics, and then KCTCS is essentially provided with a block of money out of these appropriated funds that they then kind of administer to their institutions individually. But as far as where that proportion comes from, I'll definitely check in on it, try to get you all a more comprehensive answer as to where that's being derived from. I suspect it is something to do with you know, hold harmless provision for some of our institutions and probably historic precedent related therein. So I'll do a little bit of digging and see if I can send you all a quick message from Sheila.
Do you have take a moment just to describe what hold harmless is?
It's pretty much, it was established long ago. I can't give as good an answer as Bill can, but it's a floor, it's essentially a funding floor to ensure that money is not lost in the implementation of this fund.
So I think the reason why there's different percentages is because there's different cost structures related to community colleges versus a regional versus a research university. So I think that's the primary reason.
Yeah, and to build off of that, I mean, you know, I'm thinking more, I guess, concretely about exactly how it's calculated, I suppose. But Mary's exactly right in terms of how institutions kind of rely on different sources of revenue. Like in the presentation I just gave, I mean, you saw KCTCS comprehensive institutions, they're much more reliant on those state appropriation funds, tuition revenue funds, whereas for research institutions, I mean, given that they are research institutions, they rely on a diverse stream of things, including grants, contracts, typically related to that research, as well as their tuition and appropriation dollars. So it's absolutely.
All right, we can move on to the next question that was submitted. As a faculty leader, how could I engage faculty in an initiative to revise an institution's budget process? What roles could faculty and faculty leaders play? Ronaldo, would you like to start with this one?
Yes, for sure. I think to always speak up on your budget priorities, I think that's important, and do it through the right avenues. And I know that's different for every institution. For here at WKU, for example, each of our senates do have representation on our executive budget committee, as well as just faculty and staff membership. So I would say to find out who they are, and if you have any priorities, be sure to communicate that, and expect a response. I think there should be some feedback throughout the process as well. So that's how it works here at WKU, but I know it is a little bit different at every institution.
Any of our other panelists want to weigh in on this or anything to add? Okay. The next question we had was, what financial strategies can faculty leaders use to support faculty recruitment and retention within university budget constraints, particularly for faculty in fields who could earn much more outside higher ed, such as nursing or business? Maybe Mary, you want to start with this one?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. What financial strategies can faculty leaders use to support faculty recruitment and retention, especially if the faculty can earn much higher salaries elsewhere?
I think that given the faculty an opportunity to generate research and collaborative time for to pursue their interest or their field. A lot of the driving force, I think, that most of us that are in higher education is not the money. So I think, making sure that from your department's perspective, that you have the research opportunities, the professional development opportunities, and that you balance that with the credit hour production to be able to overall meet the university's financial goals.
All right. Todd shared with me a few things ahead of time. He had a little file he put together called 5 Things I Wish Faculty Knew About Budget Officers. So I've adapted that a bit for this conversation for some prompts. So this will just be open to the panel as a whole, but in what way, describe for our participants, if you will, the ways that budget officers work to support faculty ideas. Now, obviously, there's an opportunity for faculty to make requests, but what does it look like when a budget officer and a faculty member are working together and collaborating? Todd, maybe you want to start there?
Sure. I think from experience that I've had at other places, what I found is there are a couple of things. First is, as we heard earlier, Ronaldo said, we need to make sure that we are working through the appropriate channels. So there's a piece of that. But I've had faculty who come to my office and say something like, here's something I would like to do. Can you give me some guidance on how I can move this through the system effectively? So they're not necessarily asking me to ultimately make the financial decision, because that's made beyond me and often with the board and with the president. But how can I, as a faculty member, talk through this and come prepared with what I need to understand? And so we would often talk through the process. It's things like understanding that when you are budgeting for a faculty position, let's say that you want to establish a new program. It involves not just the salary, but all of the benefits that come with that, which often adds significant costs that people aren't thinking about. Or what kind of resources are you going to need? What kind of classroom space are you going to need? How available is that? What kinds of equipment are you going to need, and how is that developed? Just really sitting down and thinking through what the entire proposal really contains, so that when a faculty member goes through the channels and goes through perhaps a department chair or dean or provost, that you've thought through the issues really well. And I think most business officers I know, budget people, are absolutely willing to help you have that conversation, to be able to go in, to be an effective advocate for what it is that you're trying to do. Of course, our question is to ask, or our responsibility is to ask a lot of questions, like, tell us what you're trying to do, what's the impact? One college where I was, we had student protests who said, and they came to us in May and said, we're going to protest. We would like this academic program established by the start of the fall semester. And I had to talk through with them, as you know, that you don't just get something accredited in 3 months, nor do you build a curriculum, nor do you hire faculty in 3 months. A lot of that has to take time to unfold. So I think it's collaborating, cooperating, talking about things, and being willing to come in with saying, here's what I'm looking at, what kinds of components do I need to consider as I put a budget proposal together, and then how would that work through the system?
Do any of the other panelists want to offer anything about that? Okay, we've got a question in the
Yes,
chat.
can I add
Yes.
a little bit, Sheila? I will say, agree with everything Todd said. One of the things is don't feel intimidated or don't be intimidated to approach us or anyone else to talk about budget or finance. You don't have to know everything, and that's okay. So I just want to stress that point, and I always do, at least with constituents here at Western Kentucky.
We've got a question in the chat. Ashley asked, why were hospitals not included in the budget information that was presented today? How do they affect university budgets, and do hospitals contribute to current funds? Angie, this sounds pretty good for
I'd
you.
be glad to go through this. Hospitals are not really considered part of the education and general part of an institution, even though with the University of Kentucky and with the University of Louisville, the hospitals are key components of those institutions. They're not really classified as an auxiliary, but they are treated as a self-supporting enterprise because of a variety of costing standards with Medicaid, Medicare, and different things. There is limited support that flows from the hospital back to college campuses, and it's generally for very specific reasons, such as support of medical faculty or medical related to the performance of providing medical education because of course it is expensive to instruct a student to become a physician. But a lot of the budgets that are depicted just do not include, they are with or without hospitals. I know at the University of Kentucky, a lot of the information we provide to our board, we provide it in both views, with the hospital, without the hospital, so that they can really understand the academic or higher ed side of the house, as well as what does it look like with UK healthcare included.
All right, and we had another question. Please describe some of the ways how a portion of IDC funding goes back to the faculty who secure external funding. Maybe Mary, you want to start with that?
So I think most universities have a policy by which they allocate the IDC or the F&A distribution. So I've seen it be various percentages, but in general, there's normally a percent that goes to the PI who obtained the grant. Often there'll be some that go to their department, their college, provost, and then kept centrally. There could be other allocations. I can tell you at our university, we take the expenses directly related to the staff in our grant accounting area and our research area, take that off the top, if you will, of the FDC, and then, or IDC, and then we allocate the balance that's remaining to the provost, the department, and the PI.
at the University of Kentucky, we, as Mary said, we have a policy which allocates the indirect cost reimbursement, and it does cover a lot of the administrative portion of administering grants, both from a proposal perspective as well as post-award and going through that process. But then we do have certain percentages that go back to the PI, which is encouraged, and the department and the college, which is encouraged to be spent on research, furthering research efforts.
Ronaldo, do you have anything to add?
Nothing to add, no.
We've got another question in the chat. I would like to hear more about best practices on incentive-based models that Angie mentioned. So maybe you can take the lead on that. And we'll see
Sure.
what those panelists have.
I'd be glad to talk about the incentive models that we've implemented. In addition to the incremental modeling, we actually have 3 models that we've developed over time where we share resources with the colleges. The first and the oldest model is what we call net tuition revenue. And it was a way to share the net tuition revenue back to the colleges that experienced growth. It is an after the fact award, and it is net of institutional aid. So it really is looking at what was that growth in tuition revenue that the institution received. And depending on which type of student, there are different percentages of net tuition revenue that is shared. For example, if it is an online program, we share 60% of the net tuition revenue back to the colleges. If it is undergraduate or graduate, increase in student credit hour, meaning increase in tuition revenue, we are now sharing 45%. Next year, that is to go up to 50% of the net tuition revenue. In addition to those, we have one called the college productivity model, and we have another called the performance funding allocation model. CPM is really looking at the values of the institution. So we're looking at what is the percentage of student credit hours being taught by tenured or tenure track faculty. That would be an example. It is a competitive-based model with the other colleges under UK. We have a fixed dollar amount that we fund each year, so it's recurring dollars that, for example, I believe this last year we did $10.5 million in total. We did 7.5 for CPM. So the colleges compete for that 7.5 million, and it becomes a recurring allocation to one of our 16 colleges or multiple of them. Under PFA, performance funding allocation, it is based in some regard on the state performance funding model. So we're really looking at increases in degree production as well as increases in enrollment. There are a variety of different metrics we use, but again, it's $3 million of recurring dollars. Once a college earns that money, it's added to their base funding from that point forward. I can add that these models were developed in consultation with the deans, and we have a regular review every 4 years of each of the models. We've already reviewed NTR, the net tuition revenue, and this year we're looking at the college productivity model for any changes because of unintended consequences.
All right. So we touched on this a little bit, but and Todd mentioned it in terms of what a faculty member or the interaction between a faculty member and a budget officer. So in terms of what needs to be shared with the budget officer to have a fruitful conversation, what does the faculty member need to bring? Do they need to have a budget? Do they need to have a fully thought out idea? Ronaldo, maybe let's start with you. So if someone comes to you and they want to talk through an issue, what is the minimum they need to bring?
It's tough to give an exact minimum. I think it depends on what the conversation is. I'll start and say you don't have to know everything to have the conversation. But certainly you have to know some fundamentals. If you look at a program, for example, what's the enrollment, what's the direct cost in terms of salaries for faculty, also operating costs, but also what are our future expectations. A lot of times with budget, we want to look beyond the current year, but we also want to look a couple of years down the road. So there would be an expectation from me or from my staff for you to know perhaps what it would look like 2 and even 3 years down the road. We probably don't have to go much further than that. And typically what happens in the conversation, questions will be asked, and there are typically some follow-ups. So if you don't know the numbers right then or don't know it off the top of your head, there's certainly an opportunity for an additional conversation.
Todd, maybe do you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, I would say as well, if you come with, I think understanding the why of what it is you're trying to do, not just the how you're trying to do it, but what it is you're actually trying to accomplish. How this program enhance the efforts of your institution? How does it fit into what you're currently doing? Really understanding it in its context is very helpful. And trying to get a sense of what your vision is for the program. I mean, yes, we want to see a lot of those details and try to figure those out. But in order to try to figure those out, I think it's very helpful to get a sense of what are you really trying to do and what are you hoping to accomplish? And what does this do for the students that we serve? Is it a great program idea, but we don't know that there's any student who's interested in it? Is a very different question than we've had 10 students who have come to us who have said, this would be really helpful for students to learn in the process of the field that they want to go in. There's a new emerging field. We'd like to be on the cutting edge of that. Really being able to have that conversation up front, I think is very helpful.
Is there anything any of the panelists would like to add? Okay, this may be our last question for the panelists, and I'll preview this. After this, I'll send you all into your breakout rooms, into the faculty circle breakout rooms. Because we had that Zoom issue at the beginning, I'm going to have to send you all into breakout rooms one by one instead of have it use the system I set up previously 4 times. But we'll do that again, so there'll be a brief delay. And then what we'll do is each of our presenters and panelists will go into, I'll send one of them into each of your breakout rooms. So you can have some small group discussions there. And mentors, I sent you the faculty circle prompts for this month, but you can also use those as conversations to get things started during these breakout sessions. So unless more questions pop up in the chat, what general restrictions are true across institutions? For example, if I want to get a project off the ground, can I use one-time funds for ongoing expenses just to get it going? And maybe this is a good one for everybody. So maybe you can start, Mary, you can start.
I think that in each university it would be a little different, but I would always caution against using one-time funds for recurring expenses. I think one-time funds are totally appropriate to use for startup expenses. But I say that with kind of some caveats. When you're starting a degree program, you may need to hire faculty, and you may purposely know that you're going to have a loss in the beginning, that you're not going to have enough revenue to cover the faculty's salary. So, but I think that those uses of reserve funds, if you will, need to be quantified on the front end and designated as such. And I think all of our universities have funds, kind of designated for that strategic purposes that meet our strategic goals.
Angie?
Yes, I would agree with Mary that while overall a basic budget principle is to fund recurring costs with recurring revenues, you will see some differences amongst institutions. I believe at the University of Kentucky, we would permit it of using non-recurring or one-time funds for a short runway. We would want a pro forma developed so that we know how much are we talking about and over what period of time, and when will that money switch from being non-recurring to recurring?
Ronaldo, let's go to you next.
Yes, so it'll might sound a little bit like a broken record, but the important thing with one-time funds is that you're strategic with it. And to Angie's point, right, there's got to be a clear timeline. So is it 1 year, is it 2 years, and then what's the plan to replace those funds with permanent dollars? I'll also add, just somewhat relatedly, is just with a university in general. Many times, particularly here at WKU, right, there could be challenging budget situations on your E&G or your educational general side, but we've got new buildings popping up, right? So it's a little bit of a mixed message, but that also comes back into certain funds are designated for capital, other funds are designated for things like meal plans and housing, and then of course you have your educational side. So in addition to the one-time versus permanent, I also just wanted to mention the different funding sources.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, it is, and I will take off the CFO hat and say, there are times in my own life when, if my wife and I are getting an income tax refund, we have to rein ourselves in because we've spent it 4 times over before it actually shows up. So I understand how it is. But it is the idea of, we want to be able to demonstrate that we can support an initiative on an ongoing basis. And so use of one-time funds, that eventually the money runs out. So we have to be able to figure out, can we seed it to make it be successful? Yes, we would consider that for certain things. Do we make that a habit or a practice? No, we don't, because we don't want to be dipping into the reserves that we have to do those strategic initiatives, just to maintain something that we find we need to continue to support on an ongoing basis.
Adam, do you have any words of wisdom from the state level? Are there any policies at the state level about this sort of thing?
Not necessarily. You know, I completely agree with everything that I'm hearing. And the only thing I can really add from my perspective is, you know, I would definitely use those funds with a solid strategy in mind, and make sure that they are aligned at least with your institutional goals and objectives, because, you know, there are a lot of programs that can go into supporting efforts depending on what they are. I had mentioned, for example, like the endowment match program, which, you know, depending on what your goal is, depending on what you're doing, that could be a fantastic asset for like STEM-age programs, for example, that would essentially become recurring funds for designated use. So I would just say keep everything as best you can aligned with the strategic vision, map everything out as best you can, as my fellow panelists have indicated. Not having that institutional perspective limits my ability to give that level of analysis, but from the state level, no, there's nothing really regulating that per se outside of, you know, restricted versus unrestricted appropriation of fund use. So.
All right, well, thank you all. Last call for panel questions for the panel as a whole, in about 4 seconds. All right, I'm going to send you all into your faculty circle breakout rooms. It'll take me just a minute to get that done, and then shortly thereafter, your panelists and presenters will be added. So give me about 3 or 4 minutes to get that done. Oh.
Yes. Yes.
Panelists, I will walk you to your different spots. And,
Hey, Sheila, I think I still need to get ported over.
oh, hold on, sorry.
Ryan is in his own room.
What? Awesome, thank you.
Sheila, I know you said you didn't need me. I just want to confirm.
Well, I will send you into one of these rooms for the final panel session. Give me just a second.
No problem.
Excellent.
Did you know? Charlie Patrick.
One of you can stay in here, Cameron, maybe Todd, you don't have a device, maybe you can stay in here and just come off this one.
That'd be great.
Adam, you can go to your office if you want, and I just sent you the URL, so you can get the Zoom link from there.
Okay, perfect. What time are we just dismissing directly from?
I'll bring everybody back in, but it'll be like 2:58. Thanks, everybody, and then goodbye.
How long is the sessions?
This one goes for another 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Yeah, well, 20 minutes, I take that back. All right.
And we're coming back in here.
Yes. Bring your device though, so you've got a, you can connect to Zoom.
Same to you, thank you.
Sign you, but I don't know which one she wants you in.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay. You're Ian? Did I get that correct?
I'm Cameron.
Cameron, okay.
Nice to meet you. Todd,
Yes.
nice to meet you. I didn't know which one you wanted him in, so I didn't just join for him.
I'm glad you waited, because I'm sure.
I'm okay with wherever. All right.
Let's see.
While they're doing, she looked my news rush.
Yeah.
Back home too.
All right, Ronaldo, I'm gonna send you to room 5. And then I will probably reconvene. We'll come back here a few minutes before 4, and then we'll be done. Todd, I'm sending you to group 3 because we've got two KCTCS folks there.
Good.
just when the conversation was getting good. Takes a little while to warm up.
Yeah, I was just getting on my soapbox, so.
Conversation was getting interesting.
It's fun being on the back end because I have the little box where I can see who's talking in each room. So I was like, oh, Michael's talking now. Okay. Oh, Michael's still talking. Yeah.
All right, everyone, thank you so much. I committed to sending you out on time and I shall do so. I'm gonna send you post-session work and some materials also. I'm gonna also send you the survey as usual. If you don't mind, if you don't usually fill that out, please go ahead and at least answer the first 3 questions. It's a blatant solicitation for complimentary comments about the Leadership Academy, so I can put them in a presentation to CAOs at the end of this month. So pretend this is a teacher course evaluation and you're doing someone a solid. Thank you all for your participation. I was really glad to see you all today, and we'll see you about the same time next month. Have a good afternoon.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.